So Riot has gone absolutely wild for 26.3 as they're adjusting 29 different champions, while we have a bunch of item and rune changes as well, so there's a lot of meta complications. And as always, we're here to break it all down and provide you guys with an update to the solo queue tier list for every single role. And in order to stay ahead of the meta for Season 16, SkillCapped is the place to be. We've got a new course for this year that our challenger players will be working on, and it revolves around keeping you up to date with all the new meta trends. As soon as we discover something new, you can expect a video to go live within that course, breaking down exactly what we found. Whether it be a new build, strategy, or rune setup, SkillCapped subscribers will be the first to know with access to this course. On top of this, we've got our weekly commentaries where our challenger experts walk you through how to carry out of the exact rank you're stuck in. We always upload 10 brand new commentaries each week focused on covering the best champions in meta. And then, of course, you'll get access to our entire catalog of premium courses as you'll be mastering wave control, vision, trading, and macro in no time. And the best part of it all is that we offer a 5-division rank up guarantee. Climb at least 5 divisions while actively using SkillCapped or get your money back, no questions asked. So what are you waiting for? Click the link in the top right corner of the screen or in the description below to get ahead of everyone else for Season 16. So we'll start off by covering all the system changes, and first we've got a buff to Actualizer. The cost of the item is being lowered from 3,100 to 2,800 gold. So this is an indirect buff to Rise, but other than Rise, there weren't any champions even building Actualizer at a high rate in 26.2. So there's a chance the item could become viable on the likes of Cassiopeia, Veigar, or Anivia, but whether the buff is impactful or not won't actually significantly influence the strength of any champs by very much. So Cashback has been the best rune to take on ADCs for Season 16, and Riot will be nerfing it in 26.3, with the gold refund on Legendary purchase dropping from 8 to 7.5%. Pretty measly nerf, to be quite honest. Even if it dropped to 7%, it would still likely be worth taking, so we can't see this change being enough to push players off of taking Cashback. The rune taken in combination with Cashback by most ADCs is Triple Tonic, and it will be nerfed with the Elixir of Force adaptive damage dropping from 30 to 25. So with both these nerfs in mind, there may be a few ADCs that like an alternative secondary page, but even then, we feel like these nerfs at most will just put the Inspiration secondary page on an even playing field with other options, and by no means will these nerfs completely remove the page from being a competitive option. Riot has a nerf lined up for the Tier 3 defensive boots that mid laners get access to on quest completion. For Merc Treads and Plated Steel Caps, you're going to be losing around 30% effectiveness of the passive shield that you get. If you guys were paying attention to win rate data over the past patch, then you would have noticed picks like Sion, Kassadin, and Swain were the highest win rate mid laners, and these Tier 3 boots being so strong was a big reason why. Other than those 3 champs getting a bit weaker in the grand scheme of things, what these changes will impact the most are assassins versus mage matchups. If you were a mage playing into a Fizz mid and an Evelynn jungle, then with double AP, it made going for Merc Treads really valuable. So if you're trying to play an assassin mid, you won't get punished as hard now if your jungler locks the same damage type. There's a pretty big nerf to Phase Rush lined up for this patch, with the ranged effectiveness of the rune dropping from 75 to 50%. The movement speed is being lowered as well, going from 18.75 scaling to 37.5% to 12.5 scaling to 25%. So the champions who had been running Phase Rush the most in recent patches, who will get hit the hardest by these changes, include Ryze, Hecarim, Nunu, Orianna, Vladimir, Galio, Gragas, Taliyah, and Garen. Ryze is the only champ out of the bunch that doesn't really have a super good alternative option, while all other champs do have something else they can gravitate towards, so expect Ryze to lose the most amount of power. We'll have to see once the changes are live, but maybe Conqueror comes back on Ryze, or possibly even Comet. The amount of resists that turrets receive based on how many tower plates have been taken is being changed from 20 scaling to 100 per plate to 30 scaling to 50 per plate, so more resists early on, but less later in the game. So if you're playing a champ who likes side laning in the mid to late game, then this is a buff for you, but if you're playing a super aggro early game bot lane duo and are trying to get a ton of chip damage off on towers early on, then you won't be progressing as quickly as before. Champion bounties are being adjusted with the devaluation rate going from 1 per 2.5 gold given out to 1 per 3.5 gold given out. The revaluation rate from farming is being adjusted from 1 per 5 gold earned to 1 per 7 gold earned. So one of the most successful new items to start the year is getting adjusted for this patch, as we've got some Dusk and Dawn changes. Health on the item is going up from 300 to 350, while the Spellblade damage base AD ratio is dropping from 100 to 75%. So more durability in exchange for less damage, which probably lands as a net nerf, but Riot does have the changes listed under adjustments, so their goal is to make them power neutral. We have to keep in mind that the Spellblade passive is only on a 1.5 second cooldown, so although it's a 25% ratio nerf, if you are able to get multiple procs off in a fight, then it becomes way more impactful than that. That's why we think the changes should land as net negative, but we won't know for sure until the changes hit live servers. Champions impacted the most by the item changes include Echo, Gwen, Diana, Volibear, Kayle, Varus, Jax, Tahm Kench, and Kai'Sa. Endless Hunger has been a pretty decent pickup on a bunch of fighters to start the year, but it's not very popular popular at all right now, so Riot's giving it a slight nudge in power for 26.3. The cost of the item is going up from 3,000 to 3,100 gold. However, the AD is being increased from 60 to 65. Since 5 AD has a gold value of 175, you are basically gaining 75 gold worth of stats for free because of these adjustments. So a very minor buff overall, but it will help out the likes of Hecarim, Irelia, Riven, Kayn, Aatrox, Umbessa, Ezreal, Briar, Zehen, and Samira the most. And for the final item change of the patch, we've got a few adjustments to Protoplasm Harness. Ability Haste is going up from 15 to 20. The Lifeline max health gain is being increased from 200 flat to 200 scaling to 300. And then the one nerf is to the Lifeline healing armor and magic resist ratios, as they are going down from 250 to 175%. So this one will negatively impact Rammus the most, since he gets a ton of resists from his W. Someone like Mundo, who doesn't build any resists at all in his core build, should be liking the direction of these changes. Melee support champions who don't gain access to a ton of magic resist and armor in their build should also like these adjustments. So with the system changes covered, let's take a look at all the direct top lane changes for 26.3. One of the more niche champions in the entire game right now, being Heimerdinger, is going to be buffed for 26.3. Health growth is going up from 101 to 105, while W base damage is being increased from 40 scaling to 140 to 50 scaling to 150. Top lane Heimer really isn't a bad pick at all despite his lower play rate, and with getting ahead as a top laner being so much more valuable this season, we actually think Heimer is extremely underrated. For the lower elos especially, it's a pick that is really easy to succeed with, so you can find Heimer placed in the top lane S tier for 26.3. Trundle is going to receive a couple of base stat buffs, with his armor growth being increased from 3.9 to 4.5, and AD growth is going up as well from 4 to 4.5. So this means you'll receive an additional 11 armor at level 18 and an extra 9 AD at level 18. So we're probably looking at a bit over a 1% boost in win rate as a result of these buffs, which still won't be enough to significantly increase Trundle's standing in meta, so we'll be leaving him in B tier for now. Tryndamere is being issued a base stat buff, with his AD growth going up from 4 to 4.5. So this means you will receive 9 more AD when you reach level 18. Much like Trundle, Tryndamere has been struggling a ton in this new season, so we can't see this buff being enough to bring him back into meta, so we'll be leaving him in the B tier. Riven is going to receive a few damage nerfs for this patch, with her passive total AD ratio going down from 30 scaling to 50% to 30 scaling to 45%, and Q bonus AD ratio is dropping by 5% at all ranks. As we can see in the comparison clips, when you have Axiom Arc completed, this ends up being a 15 loss in damage if you use all 3 Q charges and weave auto attacks in between each charge. Of course, the more items you purchase, the more these nerfs are going to hurt, but in general, you're not losing a mass amount of damage from these nerfs. At most, we could see Riven falling into A tier, but for now, we think that she will remain in a great spot, so we are leaving her in S. AP Varus top lane is going to be losing a substantial amount of damage for this patch, as his W is being adjusted so that the on-hit AP ratio is down from 35 to 25%, and the max health AP ratio is being lowered from 1.5% per 100 AP to 1.3% per 100 AP. If we have a look at the comparison clips when you have 2 items, we can see that with an E into 2 auto attacks and then an empowered Q, you're going to be losing 79 total damage. So this is actually a pretty substantial hit to the burst power of Varus in the mid game. On top of the W nerfs, his armor growth is dropping from 4.6 to 4, so you will have 10 less armor at level 18. When we factor in that Dusk and Dawn is being nerfed as well, Varus should no longer be an OP tier top lane champ in 26.3. How far down the tier list he drops exactly is tough to say, but for now, we're going to be lowering him from OP into A tier. Jace is going to be adjusted for this patch, with the changes more skewed at lowering his power in the jungle, but keeping him in check as a top laner. Melee Q base damage is going up from 60 scaling to 285 to 60 scaling to 310. Ranged Q base damage is dropping from 80 scaling to 310 to 80 scaling to 285, while bonus AD ratio is down from 140 to 130%. Q bonus monster damage is dropping from 25 to 10. And then our armor and magic resist shred is being increased from 10 scaling to 25% to 20 scaling to 35%. So for top lane Jace, these changes should land slightly positive, because if you hit both your ranged and melee Q at level 9, you are only losing 5 damage. So then when you factor in the extra armor and magic resist shred from R, in an extended fight, Jace's damage should be higher for 26.3. Jace was just a hair off moving into the A tier prior to these changes, so we're going to be moving him up for 26.3. So for the top lane tier list in 26.3, we have a new look for the OP tier, as it's going to be Ornn as the only champ locking down a spot. With the changes to Dusk and Dawn for this patch, both Kayle and Varus should be a bit weaker. Varus more so because of his direct nerfs. Riven is also getting nerfed, so she drops down, and then Ornn has been performing incredibly well to start the year because he thrives off being able to acquire more experience due to the role quest, as getting levels on Ornn is even more impactful than most champions due to the fact that he gets to upgrade items once he ticks level 13. Volibear is being moved down the tier list because even though Riot's nerfing him due to his OP tier status as a jungler, the changes will also negatively impact Volibear as a top laner, so we're dropping him down one tier. The Dusk and Dawn nerfs will also have an effect on top lane volley too. Where Gwen and Kayle land power-wise as a result of the Dusk and Dawn changes will be interesting to track. If the changes don't end up being net negative, then Kayle is going right back up into the OP tier for mid-patch. With Kayle and Gwen both having such strong extended skirmishes, we do think the Spellblade damage proc being lowered should lead to a negative outcome, even with the health on the item going up. The jungle meta is bound to see the biggest shakeup of any role for 26.3, and let's start off by looking at all the champion buffs. Bel'Veth is first up with her health growth being increased from 99 to 105. Our on-hit damage is going up as well at rank 2 and rank 3 in the spell. So when you also factor in that many other meta junglers are being nerfed for this patch, then Bel'Veth should be in a really solid spot for 26.3, and we're going to give her a bump from A into S tier. Briar is always a more difficult champion for Riot to balance because she's way more low elo skewed. Right now, Briar sits above a 51% win rate in silver, but for ranks diamond and above, she's only at 48.5%. With this in mind, it doesn't make a ton of sense as to why they are buffing Briar's scaling, because this just makes her even better for the lower elos where games last longer on average. Briar's health growth is going up from 95 to 100, while armor growth is being increased from 4.2 to 4.5. You'd think if they wanted to reduce Briar's low elo skew that we would see base health and base armor buffs instead of scaling buffs. Nevertheless, we have one more buff, and it's to all of Briar's abilities, as they will now cost 5% current health to use instead of 6%. So overall, some pretty solid buffs for Briar, and she's definitely in need of a push out of B and into the A tier because of them. With Phase Rush nerf for this patch, it's an indirect nerf to Hecarim, so Riot is going to go ahead and directly buff him to compensate. Q damage will be increased from 60 scaling to 160 to 60 scaling to 180, while the bonus damage amp per 100 bonus AD is dropping from 4 to 3%. So if we look at the comparison clips, this ends up being a 12 damage increase for each Q usage on your Spear of Shojin spike. While considering Hecarim's power for 26.3, we also have to factor in that Endless Hunger is buffed, as that has been Hecarim's most popular second item in recent patches. So the big question then becomes, are the Q buffs and Endless Hunger buffs enough to outweigh the Phase Rush nerf? Movement speed is such a valuable stat for Hecarim because it not only makes him faster, but it gives him more damage from his passive as well. So it's really difficult to judge whether Hecarim gains or loses power for 26.3. So for now, we're going to be leaving him in the B tier, but we'll adjust accordingly for mid-patch if the changes swing his power significantly one way or the other. Kayn is going to be flat out buffed for this patch, with his Q damage at max rank being increased by a whole 20 damage. Considering Q is such a low cooldown spell, and it's a spell you max out first, this buff should end up being quite impactful. As a result of this change, we are going to be moving Kayn up into the jungle A tier. Naafiri jungle has been ever so slightly on the weaker side to start season 16, so she's getting a passive monster damage buff going from 135 to 155%. Nothing too over the top with this buff, so we're going to be leaving Naafiri rated as an A tier jungler. So Nunu is one of those champions who will be feeling the effects of the Phase Rush nerf. So Riot has decided to revert a few of his nerfs from last patch. W damage is going back up from 150 scaling to 330 to 180 scaling to 360. E damage sees a partial revert being increased from 14 scaling to 42 to 15 scaling to 45. So much like Hecarim, it's all going to come down to how severe the Phase Rush nerf actually lands as to where Nunu will land power-wise. As a result, we will be leaving him in the A tier for now and circle back for the updated tier list if need be. Vi has been one of the lowest win rate junglers to start season 16, so Riot has a few base stat buffs planned. Health growth is being increased from 99 to 105, while AD growth is going up from 3 to 3.5. So whenever Riot issues base stat buffs like this, it's usually because they want to see a champion's win rate increase by around 1%, and this is the safest and most proven way for them to achieve that. Even if Vi bumps up around 1% though, she's not going to be in a significantly stronger spot, so we will be leaving her in the jungle B tier. Xin Zhao will receive 2 buffs for 26.3, with his passive max health heal going up in the mid to late game. We can see in the comparison clips that on your 2-item spike, and if you are level 12, passive heal will be going from 103 to 129, which is actually a pretty big boost. On paper, a 0.5% increase doesn't seem that big, but getting 26 more health per heal over an extended skirmish definitely isn't nothing. And then the dueling threat of Xin will be stronger for this patch, with his E attack speed going up from 40 scaling to 60% to 40 scaling to 80%. So we had Xin rated in the jungle B tier last patch, but with these buffs coming through, we think that they will be enough to give him that push he needs to slot into the A tier. It looks like Riot wants to see Zehen more in the jungle because they are buffing his Q monster damage amp going from 175 to 200%. E bonus monster damage is going up as well from 50 to 75. Analytically, Zehen has been performing pretty well over the past patch, sitting just below a 50% win rate, but his play rate has been super low, which makes it harder to get a true read on his power level. If Zehen's play rate shoots up a few percent because of this buff, his win rate could actually end up dropping due to the amount of inexperienced players picking him up. So for now, we are going to be leaving Zehen placed in the B tier, and if he does end up gaining power for 26.3, then we'll move him up for the mid-patch tier list update. So if we move on to the champion nerfs now, every single one of the OP tier junglers from last patch is being hit for 26.3. Diana is first up as her passive damage to monsters is going down from 280 to 230%. Dusk and Dawn changes will also have implications on Diana's power, so she could end up dropping quite a bit for 26.3. For now, we're only going to adjust Diana down from OP into S, but there's a very good chance the nerf is enough to drop her down to A, and if that's the case, we'll make an additional adjustment for mid-patch. Echo will be issued 2 different nerfs, with his passive AP ratio going down from 90 to 80%. Passive damage to monsters is being lowered as well, from 300 to 270%. Since Echo really likes to stack a ton of AP and eventually build Rabadons, that passive AP ratio nerf is a pretty solid hit to his late game burst power. Dusk and Dawn changes will also drop his one-shot power, so we expect Echo to be in a much weaker state for 26.3, and we'll be dropping him into the jungle A tier. And then Volibear was the third jungler we had in the OP tier last patch, so Riot's nerfing his Q damage, going from 10 scaling to 90 to 10 scaling to 50. The bonus AD ratio on Q is up though, from 120 to 140%, so Trinity Force Volley won't be affected quite as much by the nerfs. E cooldown is being increased from 14 to 16 seconds, while E damage to monsters is going down from 190 scaling to 650 to 150 scaling to 610. So definitely impactful nerfs that likely result in a 2 to 3% win rate drop for Volibear, but considering he was up around a 53% win rate in 26.2, we don't think he falls farther than A tier due to these nerfs. We're going to leave Volibear in the S tier for now, but may look to adjust him further down for the updated tier list if need be. Zed jungle is going to be a really interesting one to track for 26.3 because Riot's heavily nerfing passive damage amp from 120 to 50%. Passive epic monster damage cap is going down as well from 300 to 100. So over the span of 2 patches, Zed passive damage to monsters has gone from 180% down to 50%. The drop from 180 to 120% didn't actually result in his win rate going down much at all, so getting a good read on how these nerfs will affect his power is pretty tough. If the 26.3 nerf does not lead to a win rate drop, then I don't even know what to say, because they will without question result in Zed losing a good chunk of time off his full clear. So we're going to drop Zed from A into B tier, but if some way he escapes this nerf without losing as much power as we think, then we'll be sure to update you for the mid-patch tier list. So the jungle tier list over the next patch is likely going to be all over the place, with Diana, Echo, and Volibear nerfed in the same patch, and all 3 of them previously being in the OP tier. Who moves up to take their place is up in the air right now. We went ahead and bumped Fiddle and Kha'Zix up into the OP tier, but this is definitely subject to change as the patch rolls out. Fiddle has been a really consistent performer across all ELO brackets for Season 16, so he's a great pick to consider. We think Zyra is super strong right now too, but her play rate is just so low, which makes us less confident in bumping her up into OP. With Zed and Diana nerfed for this patch, Zyra is now going to have one of the fastest clears in the game, which is such a huge perk over all other junglers. So overall, there are just so many changes to jungle in 26.3 that we'll have to see a few days of the patch on live servers to get a true read on the meta. So definitely check back for the mid-patch tier list update next week, as we'll have a more concrete read on how the meta has aligned. So mid lane has a few pretty impactful changes for this patch, starting with Mel receiving a massive overhaul. Passive is being adjusted so that the damage is down quite significantly. Base damage and AP ratios are being lowered on Mel's passive. Mel's Q is being changed in a bunch of different ways, so instead of reading every single change out for you guys, we will have all of them up on screen so you can pause if you'd like to take a look. The big change is that the first hit of Q is now going to deal a lot more damage, while the mana cost is going down from 110 to 90. There's also some changes in regards to the missile speed as well. W change is the big one that most players who don't play Mel are excited about, because her W will no longer grant immunity to damage and will instead give you a shield for 0.75 seconds. So what this means is that you will still be able to reflect projectiles with W, but for non-projectile damage, you won't be gaining immunity to that kind of damage anymore. Mel's E is going to be changed in a bunch of different ways as well, so we will have all those up on screen for you. The main ones are that cooldown is dropping by a bit, initial damage is up, but subsequent damage is down, while root duration is now static at 1.5 seconds at all ranks. So overall, predicting where exactly Mel lands power-wise due to these buffs is pretty difficult. Over the long term, Mel should now be much easier for Riot to balance because of the W change, but how much power a change like that actually shifts initially is impossible to accurately predict. So for the time being, we will not be moving Mel up the mid lane tier list, as we'll be keeping her in C and report back for the mid-patch tier list if need be. Riot's throwing Ahri a small buff for this patch, with her W cooldown being lowered by 1 second at all ranks. Nothing that should push Ahri over the top, so she's going to remain placed in the mid lane S tier. Yone is going to be issued a buff with his Q total AD ratio going up from 105 to 110%. So nothing out of this world, but when you consider that Yone Q is on such a short cooldown, if you're able to get multiple Qs off over an extended fight, then the buff definitely adds up. This buff would mean nothing if it were for a spell that had a 20-second cooldown, but for a sub 1.3 second cooldown spell, it's better than it looks on paper. A 1% win rate boost isn't out of the question, but even then, we can't see Yone becoming significantly stronger due to his poor standing in recent patches, so we will be leaving him in the mid lane B tier. Ryze's power level is going to be influenced by a ton of different changes for this patch, as he's being directly nerfed, Actualizer is getting buffed, while Phase Rush is being nerfed. The direct nerf is to his W, with the AP ratio dropping from 70 to 60%, and the bonus mana scaling going down from 4 to 3%. So on 3 items in the mid to late game, if you were to hit an enemy ADC with your W, then it will be dealing around 41 less damage. So even with Actualizer receiving a buff, we expect for Ryze to lose power for this patch due to the Phase Rush and W nerfs. There's a chance Ryze drops down to C tier, but we'll leave him in B for now and adjust further down for mid patch if need be. So even though there aren't a ton of mid lane changes for this patch, the nerfs to tier 3 boots could lead to a drop in power for a few champs. Kassadin, who we've had up in the OP tier as of late, will be negatively influenced by the defensive boots nerfs, as he likes to go Merc Treads and Steel Caps in a lot of his games. The cashback rune nerf will also negatively impact Kassadin, so it's really going to depend on how impactful those changes land as to whether Cass drops down the tier list or not. We're going to leave him in OP for now, but if the nerfs are on the harsher side, then a move down could be warranted for the mid-patch tier list. Champs like Sway and Sion, who have been overperforming to start the year, are also really good defensive tier 3 boots abusers, so we'll be keeping an eye on them as to how much power they lose when the changes go live. Nefiri is getting moved up into the OP tier, as she's been loving a lot of the item changes for Season 16 and was already one of the better mids to close out Season 15. We're seeing this new build emerge on Nefiri, where you go Ghostblade into Zeke's Convergence and provide yourself with a mass amount of sticking power on 2 items. Whether this build is 100% the most optimal for all games is hard to say right now because of its lower sample size, but it's got a super high win rate, so definitely worth trying. Making our way down to the bot lane now, Draven is going to receive a base stat buff with his AD growth going up from 3 to 3.4, so this means an extra 7 AD for Draven when he ticks level 18. Nothing massive here, and considering Draven has been underperforming quite a bit over the past patch, we don't think the buff will be enough to move him up the tier list, so he's going to remain placed in the B tier. Ezreal has been the worst performing ADC in Season 16, so Riot has 2 buffs planned for him, with AD growth going up from 3.25 to 3.75, and EAD ratio is being increased from 50 to 60%. Nothing to get too excited about here, considering Ezreal has been a 46% win rate ADC, so even if these buffs move the needle 2%, which we don't even think they will, he'd still be in a weaker spot than most ADCs. So for now, Ezreal will not be moving up the tier list, as he will continue to be placed in the C tier. Neela is the one ADC who will be nerfed for this patch, as her base AD is dropping from 60 to 58, and armor growth is going down from 4.5 to 4.2. Neela was overperforming over the past patch, so even if these nerfs drop her down by a bit over 1%, then she's still in a great spot, so we'll be leaving Neela in the ADC S tier. So if we have a look at the complete ADC tier list, the upper echelon won't be changing at all from 26.2. Jinx will remain as the OP ADC, and then the only changes we're making are lower down the tier list. Since Dusk and Dawn is losing damage, we'll be moving Kai'Sa back down to the ADC B tier, as Dusk and Dawn being really strong is the only reason she was up in A. Even though the Varus nerfs are more aimed towards reducing his power as a top laner, the changes still hurt ADC Varus as well, so we're shifting him down from A into B tier. Cashback and triple tonic nerfs may have a small effect on the power of the ADC role as a whole, but we don't think the changes will be significant enough to where certain ADCs drop down tiers because of them. So the one support on the buff list for this patch is going to be Maokai. Maokai will have his Q base damage increased, going from 65 scaling to 245 to 75 scaling to 255. So 10 damage up at all ranks, which is a decent buff, but nothing that will turn Maokai into an OP pick. We already had Maokai rated as an S tier support, so with the buff going through, it's just another incentive to pick him up for 26.3. Braum is going to be directly nerfed for this patch, as he's been the highest win rate support in the game to start the year. Base health will be dropping by 20, so a bit of an early game nerf, and then Q damage is being reduced by 20 at max rank, going from 275 to 255. These changes still don't feel like they will be enough to remove Braum from a powerful spot in meta. Even with a 2 or 3% drop, he'd still remain in a completely fine spot. So for now, we're going to drop Braum out of the OP tier, but we'll only be dropping him down to S. So because it was just Maokai and Braum who were adjusted for this patch, we don't have many changes to report for the support tier list. OP tier will now consist of only Sona, as she continues to thrive for Season 16 with her item combo of Echoes of Helia and Whispering Circlet. Protoplasm Harness will continue to be an interesting item to track for melee supports in 26.3, because the changes do favor supports as opposed to solo lane or jungle tanks. More haste on the item and more flat healing in exchange for less scaling strength should be net positive for supports like Rell, Leona, Alistar, Nautilus, and Maokai. Alistar is one support who some players have liked taking Phase Rush on in recent patches, so he likely drops the rune entirely for 26.3 due to the nerfs. Alistar just has so many other strong options to choose from that there's really no reason to take a nerfed Phase Rush now. Spellbook is his best performing keystone for solo queue, but Aftershock, Glacial Augment, and even Electrocute are all viable options. Alright guys, one last thing, our rank up guarantee is insane. It's like signing up for the gym and getting a refund if you don't get ripped. That's how confident we are in SkillCapped. We obsess over making the best guides with top players, rigorous testing, and top tier video editing to make make your climb easy. If you're ready to level up, visit SkillCapped.com and see the difference. So there you have it, everyone. That's how we have the tier list aligned for every role as we head into 26.3. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.